we have wonderful friends from all over the country who are here, and even an international friend. So we are delighted, and I'm going to get out of the frame and let Arnie start this off.
I am going to read first from Swept Away, but I've been in the habit, whenever I do a reading, of starting it off with a poem by my late dear friend and colleague, John Woods, who taught for years at Western Michigan University and who was one of the best poets in the country. This poem is called, appropriately, At the Reading. And the epigraph, which was spoken by Fred Ekman, who was introducing John at Bowling Green University for a reading, said, "This is John Woods. You'll understand every word he says." Stimulated John to write this poem. I wanted to be so obscure that undergraduates would knock their erupting foreheads on dorm walls. Librarians would write the dean that Hegel and Ramses II were missing again from the shelves. Woods, stop! After a knock on the February door, great critics on all fours, trailing glasses and blood, would beg me to relent for the sake of their obsessions. Awesome, obscure poetry, impenetrable as a fugue in 64th notes. But I was found out for my weakness, undeveloped earlobes, fear of the dark. Each poem says one thing: love me or else love me. I'm not sure if I need to do something about the speaker view myself here to get full screen, because I'm getting a wonderful view of Susan right now. And I'm the tiny little guy over in a corner. I don't know if I can get a full screen here.
Arnie, Paul said you probably have her pinned.
Yeah, and you are in full screen.
Yeah.
Oh, I am? Good.
Uh-huh.
Then who's complaining? I'm going to read the press release that the publisher sent out for Swept Away, just to put you in the picture. Writer Dennis McCutcheon is facing the loss of his job at Brixton, a small Pennsylvania university, while coping with the after effects of a bitter divorce. His ex-wife Deirdre, an actress, says, "You're always too busy thinking when you should be doing, but never swept away. You're like a pod person visiting Earth and imitating the inhabitants so you can write about them." But his attractive lesbian office mate, Eileen Moriarty, a salty Southerner, says, "Screw the tenure and promotion committee. We need something to take our minds off academe, something completely different." That something appears out of the blue for Dennis when his alma mater, Detroit's Wayne State University, offers to produce one of his plays, Swept Away. The news seems like the solution to all his problems. Arriving in his former hometown, where rehearsals of the play are going very well, Dennis falls almost immediately into a love affair with a beautiful married woman, his former neighbor from grad school days out east. But he suddenly finds himself mugged on a Detroit street, then suspected of killing his lover's husband. His luck is coming at a price, and he begins to suspect he may be the pawn in a clever murder plot centering on, what else? Sex and money. I'm going to begin with a little tidbit from Dennis's academic life, where he and Eileen and another colleague have been coerced into proctoring a freshman composition exam. Sauntering between the broad AV platform and the green board, I surveyed the lecture hall in which over 100 students were packed into long curved rows of seats, heads bent over blue books, pens scratching away. Standing nearby, Lawrence Durwood consulted his massive wristwatch, its face the approximate size of a mason jar lid, checking it against the hall's notoriously unreliable wall clock. Durwood was tweedy and professorial looking as usual, the major difference between this and his party outfit being suede rather than tan leather wingtips and a striped tie instead of an ascot. 10 minutes, he shouted. Tipped back in a wheeled desk chair, Eileen gave every sign of being asleep until Durwood's announcement caused her to jerk forward with a clatter, eliciting wild-eyed head swiveling from the students, accompanied by a scatter of nervous tittering. Jesus, Eileen said, glaring at Durwood, what's up? Time's up. Durwood pointed at his watch. Almost, anyway. Under 10 minutes to go. And you know Professor Christman, no extra time for any reason. And 6 by 9 inch blue books only. The man runs a tight ship. Durwood grinned and dropped his voice to a stage whisper. Though after your liberal sprinkling of seawater at Dean Rimmer's party, perhaps nautical allusions aren't entirely appropriate. Ho, ho, we'll give Christman a tight ship all right. Eileen got to her feet, looking professional and attractive in close-fitting gray slacks, a darker gray sweater, a navy blazer, and gray suede chukka boots. Start wrapping it up, she shouted to the students, then pointed at the wall clock. When the big hand hits 12, it's over, no exceptions. And don't forget to put your names and section numbers on those essays. She sat on the corner of the AV platform, arms folded. That's right, Durwood echoed weakly. No exceptions. Almost immediately, students began filing forward with their blue books, setting them down in a stack next to where Eileen was perched. One kid, sporting a scruffy 3-day beard, greasy hair, and clothes he had likely picked up off his dorm room floor, started to add an 8.5 by 11 inch blue book to the growing pile. Hold it, my friend. Durwood pointed at the kid. 6 by 9 inch blue books only, per Professor Christman's express instructions. The kid regarded Durwood like the caveman in 2001, A Space Odyssey, looking at the extraterrestrial monolith. Then suddenly he flashed what he probably hoped was a disarming grin. All I could scrounge up this morning was the big blue book, he said in a stoner drawl. No prob, eh, bro? Before Durwood could respond, Eileen took the book from the kid. No prob, bro, she said cheerfully. Then she picked up one of the proper-sized blue books, set it against the larger one, and tore off enough of the kid's book so it roughly matched the rest of the books in the pile. No prob, she said again, dumping the residue in a nearby wastebasket, and waved the kid toward the door. Stunned and slack-jawed, the kid managed only an extended, "Whoa, dude." Then he walked out of the hall, pausing at the door only long enough to give Eileen a look that somehow combined both fear and admiration. The other students buzzed a bit, but continued filing out after adding their books to the stack on the AV platform. Eileen rose and winked at Durwood. One of life's little lessons, she said. Merely a spectator, I was enjoying this. At last, the clock on the wall clicked the end of the exam period. Durwood started for the pile of exam books, but before he could scoop them up, another student, clean-cut and no doubt freshly showered, walked up hastily with a blue book in his right hand. No, young man, Durwood said sternly, no extra time. You've missed your chance. The student opened his mouth, then closed it. Then he said, I'm only a minute late, and extended the book toward Durwood. No, sir, Durwood said. No exceptions. The kid took a deep breath. Then, in an outraged tone, he said, Do you know who I am? Durwood's expression reflected satisfaction at this opportunity to face down a blatant attempt at using some evident extracurricular connection to evade a just penalty and incidentally show Eileen how tough he could be. Fingering his striped tie like a talisman of authority, Durwood said, "Not only don't I care who you are, I don't care. Don't I know who you are? I don't care." "That's what I thought," the kid said. Then he buried his blue book in the anonymous middle of the pile and walked quite quickly out of the lecture hall. Eileen and I did our best to keep straight faces. Nonplussed, Durwood looked at the stack of exam books, then from Eileen to me. "Did you see where he put that blue book?" Getting no response, he said, "Do you have any idea who he was?" "I don't know," I said. Eileen shrugged, "And I don't care." So much for academe. And as I said in the intro, poor Dennis gets mugged after opening night, successful opening night of his play, but he wakes up the next morning to this. I must have fallen asleep because the next thing I knew, the telephone was ringing on the nightstand beside me, making me jump and sending another stab of pain through my skull. I noted by the clock next to the phone that about half an hour had passed since I had lain down. Then I picked up the receiver and spoke carefully as if my voice might trigger a further shock. "Hello? Sorry to disturb you, Mr. McCutcheon." The soft baritone wasn't quite in the James Earl Jones register, but pretty close. "This is Robert on the front desk. You have a visitor. Should I send him over to your room, or would you prefer to see him in the breakfast area?" Visitor? Could it be another reporter? Ed? Larry Durant? Dean Fox? Did he give a name? "He's from the police." Robert's voice was free of inflection. The information hung for a few seconds in the electronic void. For various reasons, I felt a shiver of guilt. Then I said, "I guess you'd better send him over to my room." I replaced the receiver and got out of bed, put on my shoes, and walked into the bathroom. Deciding against more painkillers, I sloshed some water on my face and rubbed my hands over my eyes. Surprisingly, this actually made me feel better. By the time I had toweled myself off, I heard a soft but authoritative knock. I opened the door. Given Detroit's current demographic, I was unsurprised to see my visitor was African American. I was, however, startled to see that the cop, rather than being in uniform, was wearing what looked like a tailored gray suit with an understated stripe, a lime green shirt, a narrow tie in muted pink, and stylish brown chukka boots in smooth-grained leather. The man looked 40-ish, with the beginnings of a paunch, and his dark-skinned forehead gleamed below his graying, close-cut hair. "I'm Sergeant Lindenbrook," he said, the timbre of his voice coming closer to Darth Vader than Robert's. "And you'd be Mr. Dennis McCutcheon." He extended his hand and we shook, firm grip, slightly sandpapery feel. "Come on in," I said, gesturing toward the room's armchair. Lindenbrook sat, and I took the desk chair, realizing as I did that sitting came as a relief. I didn't expect a mugging would rate this level of response. Trying for a non-committal tone, I added, "Did you catch the guy?" Lindenbrook's mouth twitched in what might have been a smile. "We've spoken with Officers Dooley and Hernandez about your case, and it's still under active investigation. You're a little higher profile than our usual victims." He fished his cell phone from a pocket and said, "You don't mind if I record our conversation just for accuracy's sake?" I thought for a second, feeling a bit uneasy. "I suppose not," I finally said. "Go ahead." A water break? Good. Lindenbrook clicked on the record button. "This will make things simpler. I'll just have some follow-up questions on a possibly related matter." The detective paused as if reluctant to say more. So I said, "Related matter?" I waited to see what all this parroting might produce. Lindenbrook looked at me impassively, no doubt used to this sort of verbal poker. He finally said, "First off, you told Dooley and Hernandez that you figured you were attacked by some random mugger. That right?" I felt something stir inside at the question. I seemed to be reeling from one narrative to another. Academic novel, showbiz saga, ghost story, trashy romance, and now an episode of Law and Order. Then I reminded myself that though I was a victim here, I wasn't necessarily innocent and that I'd better focus. Well, I said, the guy was wearing a ski mask and gloves and he attacked me from behind, so what can I say? Took a while for you to say that, Lindenbrook said, passing a finger across his neatly trimmed mustache. I allowed myself a ration of indignation, righteous or not. I'm not really tracking too well right now, I said, gesturing at the stitches on my scalp. And I already said as much to the officers at the hospital. Dooley and Hernandez, Lindenbrook supplied. So just to make sure, you're saying you didn't know you attacked your assailant. I'm not sure why you'd think I would have. Lindenbrook allowed another obviously tactical measure of silence, then said, you wouldn't happen to be acquainted with a couple named Durant, would you? A thrill of shock passed through me. I decided to play for time. Squeak, I said. Lindenbrook's head tilted back slightly in a pretty good single take. Come again? Cat and mouse, I said, with what I hoped was a disarming smile. And I guess I'm the mouse. That's right, Lindenbrook nodded. You're a playwright, good with dialogue. He paused. So I take it you do know the Durants. Deciding I might as well get on with it, I said, they were my next door neighbors years ago when I was at graduate school out east. I was surprised to run into them here in Detroit. They read about my coming to Wayne State for my play and took me out to dinner at Fishbones. Good food there. Lindenbrook grinned, then pressed on. Mrs. Durant's a fine-looking woman. This all seemed to be moving too quickly. She is, I said, always has been. So, Lindenbrook said, could it be you somehow got crosswise with Mr. Durant, maybe over his fine-looking wife, and that this so-called mugging wasn't so random after all? Jesus, I felt blood surging to my face. I'm the victim of a masked attack. If you suspect Larry Durant, why don't you ask him? Lindenbrook gave me one of those opaque stares. I'd love to, he said at last, but Mr. Durant's in no position to answer. He's dead. And now, a short story from Debbie, whose last book was a wonderful one called Invisible Traffic, and who has 3 books ready to go, even as we speak.
Even as we speak.
The lovely Deborah.
Well, I should also say that our books are available at Michigan News. Dean Huff will pre-order Arnie's new book for you. So I'm delighted to be here tonight. I want to thank Susan again for having us. I'm going to read a story. I'm dedicating this to my friend Joan, who's here tonight. She'll know why when she hears the story. And I should also say, Arnie and I both have colds. We're fighting colds, plus the awful Michigan March and April allergies. So we'll do the best we can here. Japanese Cemetery. June 21st, midsummer, the longest day of the year, the strongest day of sunshine in cool Michigan. Helen considered herself an optimist most of the time, but this longest day of sunshine always seemed to mark the slide back into cold, dark Michigan winter. She and the girls used the cottage 2 weeks in June and 2 weeks in August. The rest of the season, their place had to be rented to cover expenses. Mac, her ex-husband, rented 2 weeks in July, taking the girls with him one week and his current new friend the other. I don't see why I should have to pay rent, he had said the first summer after the divorce, as Jillian and Eliza loaded their duffels and backpacks into his Mustang. With the same reason you got a chunk of my retirement from university, Helen said, as she finished making tuna sandwiches for the girls. and put them in an igloo cooler to make things even Steven. Ah, he said, is that what it was? She didn't respond. Money could still start a fight. Daddy, can we put the top down? Jillian said. You bet, Jilly chick. He smiled tightly, as if he'd won something. And then later. Remember, we're on a budget, Helen said, as she drove into the resort at the beginning of their first 2 weeks in June. We're not eating at the snack bar or running off to the fun park because your friends are bored with the beach and the pool. Last summer, Daddy let us get hamburgers and Coke, Jillian said. Whenever we wanted, Eliza said. Well, Helen said, we're on a budget. The divorce might have divided things even Steven, but her half required more upkeep. A car not paid for, a place at Lake Michigan. They sold their big house and she bought a small Victorian in the city near the university. Old, worn hardwood, a charming tiny yard. Mac managed to swing a big house in the suburbs. A bank foreclosure, he'd said. He followed this boast with another. He'd heard from a reliable source at the courthouse that the doctor who lived next door to their previous home, a seemingly pleasant man, was a prime suspect in the murder of a prostitute. It's a good thing we sold the house before the news got out, Mac said, before that shit hit the fan. Sam, she said. Their neighbor was a popular widower who had a neighborhood party in his big yard every year. Every spring. Children running wild, trying to win games with prizes he provided. Big pump squirt guns, plastic cannons that shot ping pong balls. It's an ill wind that blows nobody good, Max said. He'll probably show up in one of your stories, along with a worthless husband. Helen steered the car into the sand and gravel parking space behind her garage on a bluff above the lake. The girls dragged their duffels into the bedroom and went off to find their friends. Helen was glad to be back, to the smell of cut grass and slightly damp cottage. The next morning, she joined her friends on the deck outside the restaurant for coffee, perhaps Bloody Marys or mimosas. She brought a mug of tea, and she and the girls crossed the large, grassy square by the pool where children played kickball. She went up the redwood steps, with Jilly and Eliza following. Her friends were there before her, a couple her age, Bertie and Ephraim, and an older couple, Hiroshi and June Miyazaki. Hai and June taught at her university, but in different departments. Hai and Ephraim often played golf with Mac. We have croissants, said Bethy, a cheerful blonde who taught yoga. She held up a plate to Jillian and Eliza as they passed, on their way to their friends in the corner of the deck. Ephraim got up and gave Helen his deck chair. Until the divorce 2 years ago, he'd been Mac's summer doubles partner. And unless there was a hot shot from Chicago, they won the weekly tennis championships. A big pitcher of margaritas, Betty said, holding it up. Dumped that tea over the rail. When Helen hesitated, Betty took her cup and poured the tea over the deck railing into the chicory and phlox below. Here, she filled the mug from the pitcher. Margarita day starts now. The other children trooped inside the restaurant. Jillian stood next to her and said softly, everyone's getting French fries. Helen shaded her eyes and looked at her beautiful daughter. And Eliza leaned against the rail behind her and looked at the lake. 2 years ago, they weren't on a budget. Now she was the only one here who was. Then you better have some too, Helen said. The girls turned and casually followed their friends into the restaurant. I have a tea time, Ephraim said. Sunscreen, babe, Bethy said. Ephraim raised his eyebrows at Hai. You sure you don't have time to join us? We could use a fourth. No, not today, Hai said. June and I will be on a plane to San Francisco in, he looked at his watch, 7 hours. June has us packed and ready to go. Ron will pick us up and drop us off at the airport. June raised her margarita to acknowledge the accuracy of this. She was wearing cotton pants, a long sleeve shirt, and a floppy hat to protect her from the sun. If you're going to start drinking those now, Ephraim said, don't let the children go to the beach. Make it a pool day so the lifeguard can keep an eye on them. He picked up his sweater and keys and headed for their car. Swing easy, Bethy said. Good margaritas, Helen said. Tequila-infused margaritas in the strong sun. The way of the day was set. Bethy raised her glass. You all come for dinner. My chicken will spoil if I don't get it on the grill. We have potato salad, June said, and leftover watermelon I will have to throw away if we don't eat it. I'll make a green salad, Helen said, and we have chips. The children came out of the restaurant, screen door banging behind them. They were eating French fries covered in ketchup in paper bowls. We want to go to the beach, Jillian said. Go to the pool. The lifeguard will keep an eye on you until we get there, Bethy said. Oh, margarita day, her daughter said, and they trooped off to get their suits. Bethy poured refills, and they sat in the strong sun. A pink dragonfly landed on the edge of Helen's mugs, its wings working slowly up and down. There were 8 flat stones from the shore lined up on the table. Skipping stones? Helen asked, picking one up. The stone was hot from the sun. Hi sat forward and took the stone from her hand. My stones, he said, and he put it back in the row. We will take them on the plane with us today to San Francisco. Tell the story, his wife said, from the shade of her big hat. I will, I said, leaning back in his chair. Our family has been buried in the Japanese cemetery in San Francisco for generations. My grandfather was interned in the Second World War. My father fought in Vietnam. They're buried there with their wives. June and I will be buried there. And we have a place for Ron if he wants it. The headstones are already designed and beautiful marble flower vases in the traditional style. All this is within a rectangle outlined by tile, and in the space in front of the headstones and vases will be a traditional Japanese garden, a rock garden, just as there is in front of my ancestors' places. Every summer, I gather 8 flat stones from the edge of Lake Michigan and take them back for a rock garden when we go for a visit. Of course, there are also stones from San Francisco Bay and from Japan. Someday, we will be buried there. A silence fell as everyone thought about this. When Helen lifted her cup, the dragonfly flew away. Hai leaned towards her, and he went on. The number of stones is important, never 4, because the word for 4 is similar to the word for death. Never 9, because the word for 9 is similar for the word for suffering. I always find 8 stones. 8 is the number of good fortune, because the character for it is 2 downward strokes that are wider at the bottom, signifying better things to come. Then Hai said softly, I've read your books, your stories about wayward husband, precocious children, a murderer next door, this resort the late. He held up a finger. This is my story. You may not use it. Later that evening, margarita's gone, chicken grilled and gone, Jilly and Eliza asleep in the only bedroom. Helen watched the last of the deep, deep pink of the sunset out over the lake and pondered. Did Hai know the rumors about their former neighbor Sam? Hai and June attended some of his spring parties, drinking with the grown-ups in Sam's screen summer house. She pulled out her laptop and put it on the metal table, reached down to plug it in, and opened a file. She centered the type line and typed the title, Summer Solstice at the Lake. Then she deleted it, and in its place typed, Cemetery Stones. And that's it. Did you see something about Dean? He did.
I'm glad I came before Debbie. I hate to follow her. I had this strange experience of having two books come out during the pandemic. One, the novel Swept Away, and the other was a full-length collection of poetry. So any readings I've been doing have been pretty much Zoom. So I guess I'm used to it by now. And here is the cover of the new book. I don't know if you'll be able to see it, The Infernal Now. And as we have been with our last several books, I've been fortunate that the cover is from a wonderful piece of art by a former student of mine, Peter Gooch, who was not only a creative writing student of mine, but also had an MFA in art from Western Michigan University. And just by happy coincidence, Peter sent me a story that just won first place in the competition of a literary magazine. And it's a wonderful story. I just read it. So I thought I'd start off with the poems by reading the title poem from this book, which is called The Infernal Now. I've been doing some less usual things for me lately. I've been sort of fascinated by quantum mechanics, and it begins to creep into my poems. And I also find that I'm writing more poems about my Scottish childhood and my immigration from Scotland to this country a long time ago. Anyway, this is The Infernal Now. And the epigraph from a book called Biocentrism by Bob Berman and Robert Lanza reads, "But our theory of the universe, called biocentrism, in which life and consciousness create the reality around them, has no space for death at all." And here's the sonnet that stimulated me to write. "I'm getting to the point where thoughts of death intrude more often on my days and nights than 40 years ago, when drawing breath was thoughtless, pulsing on in gigabytes. But now I hear my mind makes time and space irrelevant, and that I'll never die, that every moment is a brand new place, and time's flow is illusory. But why my mind, awake or dreaming, has the power to make that string of nows turn on a dime and mark each non-existent passing hour seems more to me like reason without rhyme than living with a future and a past, where now means that each breath may be my last." And COVID, we just got our second booster shots today. And I wrote this poem partly because of COVID, and you'll hear why. And my friend Tex Ragsdale, best and oldest friend, is mentioned in it, and it's called Gone, with an epigraph from Gerard Manley Hopkins that I'm sure you'll recognize. "It is the blight man was born for. It is Margaret you mourn for." Waiting in the car while my wife gets her COVID shot, I listen to Joni sing "Carrie, Get Out Your Cane," her dulcimer like coins jangling into a tin pot. Then the twanging of Stephen Stills disguising pain with lyrics and riffs that underpin his throat-catching whimsy in Sweet Judy Blue Eyes. Then Sweet Judy sings My Father to rippling piano and her 12-string Gibson, back in the day of all those desperate flings, back when she and Joni, Stills, Crosby, and Nash were young. Judy's album was Who Knows Where the Time Goes. It's gone all right, but the decades are nudged aside, and I'm sung back to the tacky apartment where I lived alone on West Main Street, teaching sophomores how not to rhyme, playing my own songs absent my best friend's guitar licks and stand-up bass. Because his new wife left him no time for me, I backed off to give them peace. Until at 6 one night, he'd shown up. I took it as long as I could, he said, then moved in. He'd sit till the small hours and play Joni's Blue, while I tossed in bed, hoping his pain would pass, at least enough so we could face the coming day. He took the bedroom another friend who'd lost his spouse had used. That friend, when my earnest efforts came undone, moved to a small, crappy room in a crumbling frame house, where a few months later, he left notes for everyone he knew, including one for his landlady, taped up neatly to the front door frame, instructing her to call police before entering. He sat in the bathtub and shot himself to leave no mess. At the funeral, I learned his parents burned all of his notes like refuse. Their anger blew my self-dramatizing guilt apart. My other friend grieved as Joni sang away his blues, and before too long, he married his high school sweetheart. We played our own minor league music in local bars, the whole indulgent catalog, the Walking Away from Lovers playlist, Dylan, Cohen, Joni, and wars, Vietnam, and all the rest, hoping for a new day. We took prank calls. Do you have Prince Albert in a can? Best let him out before he smothers. Or, is John there? What's that? No John there? Do you shit in Dixie cups, man? And one from an older woman student with red hair who asked what I'd say if she told me she was nearby, driving in nothing but high heels and a coat. For some strange reason, I rebuffed her offer without a sigh, then hated myself for my unkindness, smug and dumb. And our apartment actually saw 2 or 3 pals crawl off to sleep in the bath. Too many tokes. Another crashed with us long enough to have a key. His snarling shaver woke us, giving rise to grim jokes about Frank Zappa's Weasels Rip My Flesh. Another time, Nelson Algren was a guest, and after reading something of mine, said, "More laughs, otherwise why bother?" We'd met walking out on a Leslie Fiedler meeting, preferring the Billy Goat Tavern and its good cheer. Nelson is gone now, with so many others. We wait for our own turn. It may be near the point where we're no fun anymore. But we drive through the parking gate fortified by vaccine, my wife and I, while Joni sings, "Let's Not Talk of Fare Thee Wells Now." And though we may mourn for ourselves, like Margaret, we still love earthly things, still make music, look for the laughs, still glad we were born. I actually got some wonderful blurbs for this book. One from Jim Daniels, one from Nancy Eimers, and in one of those rare strokes of synchronicity, a blurb, beautiful blurb from Diane Seuss, who almost immediately afterwards won the National Book Critics Circle Award for her book, Frank Sonnets.
And then the other, she's sleeping with that.
Yeah, she's winning awards all over the country. This one goes back many years. It's called His Own Devices. A rectangular fabric covered behemoth, all edges and angles, the color of sand laced with minerals, worn spots signaling the imminent breakthrough of springs and marked by the residue of cat vomit. The sofa calls to mind the day when his next door neighbor asked him to accompany her on a field trip to a dredged canal in Dover to search for fossils amid the Mesozoic sludge and shiny grit. Mismatched furniture, two painted wooden chairs the color of lizards, a sun catcher shaped like a bird hanging in the room's single window, a tiny television horned with antenna, complete with tinfoil to improve reception, a rickety brass floor lamp shade askew, a frayed green hooked rug matching the sofa's general air of overuse and obsolescence, stacks of 19th and early 20th century British novels, a metal typing table with an antique typewriter that calls for considerable hand strength to operate the balky keys. The public health psychologist takes it all in. They face each other on the mismatched chairs. Her hair in a bun, professional jacket, skirt, blouse, feet crossed at the ankles, sensible low heels. Why is she here? You're not sick, she says. He tells her he feels sick, that life feels like something he's living to fill time. And he does ask her why she's here, if not to confirm that fact. She says she never makes house calls, that she's only here because this will be their last meeting. So you're dumping me, he says, and my problems. Look at all these books, she says. She begins to pile them into a tower, then stops and looks at him. You read these, she says. You write, you're articulate, probably smarter than all my other clients, maybe me too. So that means you won't help me? Can't? It means you can help yourself. He tells her that's a cliche of analysis and counseling. You've just made my point, she says. She tells him she got into public health counseling because private practice is full of clients like him. You'd be a gold mine, she says. You'd talk and uncover more and more stuff to talk and talk about. She stacks more books, then smiles at him. And I'd make money. I want to help clients who can't help themselves. So you're leaving me to my own devices. Good way to put it, she says, because you're good at constructing your own labyrinth. And when you're ready, you'll find your own way out. She looks at the vomit-stained sofa. And you have a cat. It died, he says with some satisfaction. Then, fine, how much do I owe you for today? She says she had a meeting on campus then. This is in the house and on the house. Very funny, he says. She rises. Goodbye then. Take care. And remember, you're not sick. She leaves. He knocks over the tower of books, then picks up the history of Mr. Polly and gets back to his own devices. And these are some brand new poems that I'll end with, reading quickly. This one's called OCD at the Publix. The guy at the front of the checkout line in the Publix market on Longboat Key is not some doddering old fart, insane, or demented. So far as we can see, we probably qualify more than he as senior citizens. But in his brain, it's pretty clear to us something must be amiss, for he's unable to refrain from inspecting each item in his cart before placing it like a blasting cap on the conveyor, after which he'll start the process again, making sure a gap remains between each item he must set down and the last, just like a picky child who'll insist that it's his right not to let the potatoes, peas, and meatloaf be piled haphazard on the plate. He keeps an eye on everything, but won't turn toward us, as if his back could stop our nascent sigh. His attention's on the unhurried fuss of the cashier and the bagger, ringing and bagging his purchases with scant care. He looks uneasy, his radar pinging, but makes no protest, just as we don't dare laugh aloud or voice exasperation at this little pageant, one of many enacted here by the population of this barrier island on any given day. Elderly and affluent, self-absorbed, parking carts in the aisles, looking as if they'd paid rent to be there, musing narcissistically in baffled contemplation of the shelves, or veering suddenly to block our way for quirky reasons best known to themselves. We slalom down the aisles each shopping day with all the good grace we can muster. But this guy in cargo shorts and garish shirt is something else. No ordinary nut. His response to the cashier's smile is curt, and like a caveman at a cyclotron, he works his credit card by fits and starts, then takes his groceries at last, moves on to pageants starring cars and shopping carts. The cashier and the bagger give us smiles, restrained and tactful, suggesting we're not part of the horde behind us in the aisles, already puzzled by the goods they've bought. But we all know we are, or will be soon. So we say nothing, buy our stuff and go, and pack our car out in the heat of noon, then leave our cart between the rails, just so. This sonnet, and I don't know if you've noticed, but I use rhyme a great deal. And one of the things I try to do when I use rhyme, I find it gives tension where tension might not have been otherwise. And also it pulls things out of you that you might not have known were in there. This one goes way back. Well, you'll find out how far this one goes back. This is called Flora Hovering. Flora hovering would say, a crow flew from Donegal to pick a white stone. Then, fingers fluttering, followed her own cue to snatch some morsel from my plate. And when I'd cry my 3-year-old's outrage, she'd laugh and steal another crumb of what I valued most. My tomboy aunt, who never whined that half of life seemed close to her. She's now a ghost, haunting the room and kitchen of my past. Her raucous energy and sense of fun still part of me, and will be till the last Scots-Irish memory fades, and it's all one who snatches what from whom. That crow could take each morsel of my life, all for her sake. This one's also pretty self-explanatory, as I feel poems probably ought to be. It's called Gatwick, 1998. We landed at Gatwick in early June, but England, unexpectedly, was hot. The rental car would not appear till noon the next day, so we settled on a spot with air conditioning at the hotel, soaked in the pool with dinner yet to come. My father had to check in there as well, but renting a cool room involved a sum he balked at. So he found himself a place cut rate with no AC. The heat was less important than the price. It was the base, like his old barracks in the town, I guess, from which he ventured forth to find his favorite places, those he'd known so well when he was stationed there. We didn't mind the downtime on our own. We knew he'd tell us all about it in the restaurant. He did, of course. He'd found his favorite pub, the place the territorials would haunt for pints and all the standard English grub. And what fond memories did his visit wake? We waited patiently to hear the tale. Would it involve old comrades or the ache of lost romance that time could never stale? But unsurprisingly, what irked him still, the memory preserved for all those years, was that some welcher stuck him with the bill for everybody's whiskeys, snacks, and beers. The punchline to the dinner and the gab, he aired his grievance. We picked up the tab. Our lives were haunted by his memories. We never stiffed him, never brought him ease. And this last poem I just wrote a few days ago, and I actually did dream the imagery in it. It's called Winter Dream. Our son drives us along a snow-clogged track and slides amid a blinding swirl of white. The journey ends within a cul-de-sac when the car strikes a sign that, like a kite, rises and tumbles before us. The snow is axle deep. He goes for help the way we came, while you start off careful and slow toward a stand of evergreens. I stay beside the car and read the makeshift sign scrawled with the owner's blunt and misspelled plea for drivers to respect his borderline. I peer through the feathery swirl and see you standing near a stunted evergreen that shivers off its white shroud, letting go a scarlet cardinal, his crest unseen beneath a tiny cap of dazzling snow. The small bird trembles like a sacred heart. And holding hands, we watch as day grows late. The wind blows cold, and hoping not to part, we face the night together, and we wait. Thank you. And if we have any questions, we'd be delighted to chit chat for a little bit.
Absolutely. I think we have time for a few questions. I want to thank you both, Arnie and Debbie. What a delightful reading.
Hi, Zaydun.
Can we ask, Zaydun, is that your granddaughter?
This is Lena, my daughter. Say hello.
Hi.
Hi, Lena.
How nice you're here tonight, my dear.
Yeah, it was wonderful. Yeah.
Anyway, go ahead. I'm sorry. Oh,
Hi, Barb.
hi, Bob.
Questions?
Hey.
Go ahead and put in the
That was
chat.
great.
Thanks.
Thank you for inviting us.
I have a question, Arnie.
Yeah.
Dan.
Yes. A former student from
Yes.
Mexico.
From, I don't know, what, like a decade or so, right? That's it?
Yeah, maybe that.
Yeah, something like that. Anyway, I actually, I'd read your book of poetry, and I actually just purchased Swept Away tonight, by the way. But I was surprised to see something that has like a mystery and crime element to it that you've written. It's not something I expected from you. Was that a decision you made, or just where the story took you?
It was partly both. I sort of let the story drag me along with it once it got going. And one of the things when I started writing the first draft or so, Dennis's roommate or office mate, the guy, and the story sort of felt inert. It was like, two bros back and forth, and when I changed it to Eileen and made her a lesbian, the whole thing took off. It became full of life. So that sort of gave me some impetus. But I also knew that Dennis was going to have things happen to him that he certainly didn't expect. One of the epigraphs for that is from the only movie Marlon Brando ever directed, called One-Eyed Jacks. And at some point, he falls afoul of the law, Marlon Brando, and the great character actor Ben Johnson says to one of his pals, "Look at here, what's happening to Romeo." And
He was asking, does the rhyme do the same thing? Does it pull you in? Were you asking about the rhyme?
No.
Oh, okay.
Oh, I said crime, a crime.
Crime, that's it.
so that was a long-winded answer to a simple question.
It's okay. By the way, beautiful poems, especially. And I'll take a selfish second here. Arnie, when I was in school with you, the first class I had for you, you gave a piece of advice of remember, it's criticism of your work, not criticism of you personally. And I just want to let you know that I've carried that piece of advice beyond just writing and everything and into my work and everything like that. It is one of the absolute most useful pieces of advice I ever got in my entire life. And I've shared it with countless people, whether they've asked for advice or not. But
that really means a lot to me, Dan. One of the things I always tried to do in my writing classes, and Debbie does this in hers too, is it's sort of a cliche of creative writing that when people start criticizing someone else's draft, they pretty much tell the writer what they'd have written.
Right.
If it had been their story or poem. And, what we try to do is figure out what the person who wrote it wants to do and try to help them get there.
Yeah. Well, it's through my entire life, someone saying, even if they mean it offensively, you did that wrong, or that thing you did was bad, or anything like that. Because of that piece of advice from you, it doesn't hit me here immediately. And I've been able to handle, I think, and grow a lot just from that one piece of advice. So thank you.
Yeah.
One piece of advice that Arnie gave me, not as a writer, because I don't write, was he always told me to slow down.
Well, you do live life at high speed, Barb.
Well, that's how I was made. Slow down the motorcycle, slow down the car, just slow your roll. But thank you. I'm slowing down now.
Besides.
Well, we're delighted all of you came tonight. It's just lovely. We appreciate it, and we appreciate the library making this happen. And
Wonderful reading. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Debbie. Thank you, Arnie. Your work is alive and intriguing and inviting and crisp. So many things that going on in your poetry and prose. So I'm so happy you're here tonight as writers in love and sharing some of your experiences and hearing from your students and friends. So thank you.
thank you.
Thank you, Susan, for bringing all those folks together. And it's wonderful to see everybody's faces. Thank you for coming.
And have a good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We love you.
We love you
We
too.
love you.